Good evening and welcome. I'm Dr. Brian Henning, Professor of Philosophy and of Environmental Studies at Gonzaga University, where I'm also the founder and director of the Gonzaga Center for Climate and Society and the Environment. Informed by an abiding commitment to a just society and care for the planet, the Gonzaga Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment serves our campus and the Inland Northwest by promoting innovative interdisciplinary scholarship, teaching, consulting, and capacity building on the climate, society, and the environment. And it's my really great pleasure to welcome all of you here this evening or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. As many of you may be joining us from other places on the world, feel free to share from whence you're joining us in the chat if you feel like it. A quick bit about our webinar platform here. Closed captioning has been enabled. You can turn that feature on or off at your discretion at the bottom of your Zoom window. As this is a webinar, only the panelists can share their video or unmute themselves. Later in the Q&A, we might make it possible for you to be able to participate more in another way. The chat is, as you can see, currently enabled. You might open that window if you wish, and you're free to use it to make comments to those assembled. However, should the chat become disruptive or if you're disrespectful, I will have to change the settings so those comments can only go to the host. Please use that judiciously. Beyond chat, a helpful way to share feedback during the talk is to use the reactions option at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to give a thumbs up now if you'd like to practice. Also note that our event this evening is being recorded and it will be shared via our YouTube channel within the next few days. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to begin by acknowledging the indigenous people who have been part of this land in what we now call Eastern Washington State for more than 10,000 years. In the spirit of the Jesuit practice of composition of place, we acknowledge that Gonzaga University resides on the homelands of the Spokane tribal people. This land holds the cultural DNA and the spirit of the first people of this place, the people of the river. It's their ancestors who are here and bring forth the power of this place, the knowledge that comes from the land. We're grateful to be on this land and ask for its support as we work to manifest our intentions during this gathering of hearts, minds, and spirits. If you are joining us from somewhere else in the world and you want to acknowledge the indigenous people on whose land you reside, feel free to share that in the chat. And now to our topic for this evening. I first became interested in the work of Thomas Berry while working on a book project called Writers in the Storm: Ethics in an Age of Climate Change. The original title of that book was to be The Reluctant Steward. However, in the process of trying to complete that project, I found that I no longer agreed with the initial premise that we should see ourselves as reluctant stewards of the earth. Fortunately, about this time, I happened upon the work of Thomas Berry, whose capacious notion of the great work provided me exactly the framework that I was looking for to complete that project. I'm now enthralled with Berry's vision, and it's because of that that I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for this evening. Dr. Mary Evelyn Tucker teaches at Yale University School of the Environment and the Divinity School. She is co-director with John Grimm of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. With Grimm, she organized 10 conferences on world religions and ecology at Harvard University. They were series editors for the 10 resulting volumes, also from Harvard. They were students of Thomas Berry's and worked closely with him for 40 years. They edited his books, including selected writings, and wrote his biography. They direct together the Thomas Berry Foundation. With Brian Thomas Swim, Tucker and Grimm created a multimedia project called Journey of the Universe that includes a book, an Emmy Award-winning film, a series of podcast conversations, and the free online courses from Yale and Coursera. This project was inspired by the evolutionary ideas of the Jesuit scientist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin and Thomas Berry. She served as vice president of the American Teilhard Association from 1978 to 2020. Dr. Tucker, we're eager to hear your views on Thomas Berry's vision for the Earth community. Join me, everyone, in welcoming Dr. Tucker.
Thank you, Brian. What a beautiful, kind, generous introduction. It's such a pleasure. It's a pleasure, Brian, I want to say, to be with you. And then I'm looking in the chat to be with so many people there, many Teilhardians, in fact, Kathleen Degnan and Judy Emery and Jennifer Morgan, all of whom knew Thomas Berry very well, and Paloma Pavel and Carl Anthony, dear friends from California. And I see a student is there, Mike Johnson, and I could go on, but I'm very, very grateful for all of you who've joined us, and from Australia and from Canada and Europe. Thank you. And I'm particularly pleased, of course, that our student Sam King is here, and he's going to say a few words soon, one of our very finest graduate students at Yale in all the years that we've been teaching here. But I want to also say thank you to Brian, because I'm deeply impressed, certainly by this extraordinary new center at Gonzaga University, the Center for Climate, Society, and the Environment. And as you've seen, this lecture series is just quite remarkable. And the one I believe that preceded this was on rights of nature, a debate. And Thomas Berry, of course, was one of the founding fathers of that whole discussion many, many years ago. But it's a marvelous series, and I congratulate you on this new center in the series. And then I just want to mention, because it's very rare, I think, that we have an opportunity to be in dialogue with someone like Brian, who is actually doing this work from maybe more philosophy, you could say, and ethics, but from a very compatible position of a process universe, because he's a Whiteheadian. Some of us are Teilhardians, but it's all about this process universe. And we so welcome that collegiality. We've been in touch with the process people at Claremont for many years. And John Cobb in this work has been central to so many of us. So that is one of the great connections here that I wanted to highlight. And in particular, his book, The Ethics of Creativity, Beauty, Morality, and Nature in a Processive Cosmos. I have to say, I haven't yet read it, but I look forward to it. And I gather it's an award-winning book. But most importantly, perhaps for some things I want to say tonight, his book with Lexington Press called Beyond Mechanism, that he co-edited, the subtitle is Putting Life Back into Biology. Now, he's got a plethora of some of the great thinkers in this area who are talking about emergence, systems biology, biosemiotics, homeostasis, symbiosis, self-organization. Now, what I want to say, you see, is at the same time that Thomas Berry was moving forward in a very dynamic sense of the universe and life, so was this whole discussion of biology. So it's very complementary, and I hope to return to it. But the self-organizing dynamics of the universe is what Thomas was all about. And that's part of that discussion of beyond mechanism. So those are just some opening comments of this wonderful dialogue with Brian, with the center, the Jesuits getting on board for climate change and ethics. So it's a very, very important moment. And I thank Brian for his great work. And we're going to begin, though, with a film, a very short film of 3 minutes. It's on our website for Thomas Berry under the section of the environment. But the Cosmos group, who has an online journal, they made this film, and we love it. They really did a beautiful job on it. So back to you. Thomas Berry's long life spanned the major events of the 20th century, from the First World War at the time of his birth to significant climate and ecological disruption, from electrical energy to solar energy, from community phone lines to computers, from horse and buggy to placing a man on the moon. He sought throughout his life to make sense of these changes.
He was widely read in world history and religions and lived immersed in the narratives of time that were continually expanding, from human history to earth history to universe history.
Thomas Berry sought a way to be grounded in the great vessel of life, the cosmos, and evoke this with the power of story, which elevated the voices of birdsong and migrations, revered the living forests and ancient mountains, evoked the roaring power of oceans and rivers,
There are few people who have grappled for so long to bring forth a healing vision for the Earth community, a term he created to indicate our shared sense of belonging to something greater, humans and nature in continuity.
Yet, he intuited at a very early age that something was being lost, something in the depths of the integral functioning of the planet itself with the race to industrialize and modernize.
Humans, he felt, are not simply political or economic entities, but biocultural beings amidst the vast diversity of life systems and species.
He recognized the power of an evolutionary story to engage humans in the great questions. Where have we come from? How do we belong? Why are we here?
This led to his signature essay, The New Story, in 1978. A new story of the universe, he felt, could help humans become mutually enhancing participants in a multicultural planetary civilization as cultures came in contact around the globe, often for the first time.
Next, with Brian Thomas Swim, he worked for over a decade to write the universe story, a grounding for the transformations that he saw were needed for a new period in human history.
Today, Barry's perspective adds fresh energy and urgency to what he called the great work, namely, what each person and community can contribute to a flourishing future. As he would say, this work is for the future generations of all species.
Thank you. It's just a beautiful film, isn't it? I think it really captures something of Thomas's spirit. And I just want to elaborate a little bit more about his life. And then I'm going to turn it over for a little bit to Sam King to say what Thomas Berry meant to him and how he's working with us on Journey of the Universe as the outreach director. So many of you know some of Thomas Berry's life. And I'm just going to go over some of it with you, but I also want to point out on the Thomas Berry website, just thomasberry.org, there is a biography. This film, as I say, is there, and some of his essays are there. So there's quite a bit of material that you can access later at thomasberry.org. There's also a massive open online class on Coursera, the worldview of Thomas Berry, and that's free for audit and so on. So if you go to Coursera, you can follow up. It's a 6-week course, but it expands into as long or as little as you like. You know, it's hard to get a full picture of Thomas Berry, isn't it? Because he was such a multi-scholarly, multi-geologian being that I think he awed all of us. There's absolutely no question about it. And John and I were fortunate to work with him for 40 years. He married us in 1978 and so on. So very, very important to our life, clearly, and to our work to this day. So he began, I want to emphasize, some of you who value meditation, contemplation, he was a monk. He lived in a monastery for years and years and didn't start teaching until he was 45. He was part of a Passionist order, which is a monastic order, and yet it's also a preaching order. So out of these years, and he entered at 18, out of these many, many years of meditation, his vision arose, the sense of the prayer life of the daily cycle of the monastery, the prayer life of the seasons. You know, we're in the season right now between the autumn equinox and the solstice, that deep sense that we're embedded in the earth cycles was very, very important to all monastic life, as you know, Benedictine and so on. He also, though, had this tremendous drive for learning. And it wasn't to be a scholar, he became a scholar, but it was to learn. So in the monastery, he would always laugh and say, I stacked up the books by the side of the bed and read them in the middle of the night in between our prayer cycles. And he had this little flashlight and darkened the edge of the door and so on. So he was driven. He read all of the church fathers and so on, was deeply influenced, obviously, by the Catholic tradition and the great thinkers of the Catholic tradition. He took the name Thomas from Thomas Aquinas, who had a major influence on his life as one of the great synthesizers of medieval Christianity. But he began to search for more. And when he was during his education years, he was able to get to Catholic University. And there in Washington, D.C., he began to study the philosophy of history with Vico and so on, and the ages of the human, which began to expand his mind and perspective. And he even had some exposure to Asian religions there and Native American religions. So from his graduate school days, this expansion of the circles of his mind and heart were placed. Now, you also probably know that his order did not want him to teach, and he insisted that he had to teach. He was teaching in the seminary before he went to Catholic University and doing kind of radical things like teaching Marx and so on, which they weren't that happy about. But he finally laid down the law because he was invited to teach at Seton Hall over in New Jersey and said, I'm going to teach or I'm going to leave the order. It was that important for him to go and teach. And he did for 4 years at Seton Hall. And that was followed, and Seton Hall had an Asian studies program. So he went over there to begin to teach Asian studies in the 60s. And then he transferred to St. John's on Long Island, where he got an interesting offer also to teach Asian religions. And he was 4 years there. There was a big strike at the university because the diocese was trying to clamp down on academic freedom and so on and so forth. And many were dismissed. Let's just leave it at that. We put it in our biography, but it's quite a story. And fortunately, Christopher Mooney, a Jesuit at Fordham, picked up the phone and said, Thomas, would you consider coming to Fordham? And so sure enough, he did. And that was in 1967. And John went to study with him a year later in 68. And I came in the early 70s. And what he did at Fordham was create the only history of religions program in the country at a Catholic university for a start, but also the most distinctive history of religions program. I did my master's with him. John, as you know, did his PhD with him in Native American traditions, shamanism in particular. But I went on to Columbia for the PhD, but that was a much more specialized learning, a lot of language study and history study. But the draw of what Thomas created at Fordham was he understood the spiritual dimensions of these religions, and you could imbibe them from him. Kathleen will know this. She was there, and Judy and others, of how powerful those classes were, even though they were very challenging for all of us. So this sense then that his scholarly work went from the Western Christian tradition to the Asian traditions and eventually to the indigenous traditions, because his good friend Ted DeBerry at Columbia asked him to teach Native American religions at Barnard. And Judy Emery and a group of us would go up there and listen in to this class that was standing room only. And that was in the 70s, some of the very first classes in indigenous religions ever taught at universities in this country. And that's where John picked up those studies. And all of this led to a sense of world history. You know, we were all trying to understand the larger picture, and he was into William McNeill and Rise of the West, and the world history movement was starting at that time. Eventually, as you know, he moved into earth history, and that's where he called himself a geologian. He never liked the title theologian because he wasn't. He was a cultural historian of these world's religions. But the geologian he loved, and it came to him as he was flying back from the Seychelles and came over the Nile River, looked down and could see this magnificent river formation. And he said, I am a geologian. I am a student of these geomorphic geological systems. And finally, he came to the notion he was a cosmologist because he did universe history. And the traditions of Asia, I would suggest, especially Confucianism and the traditions of indigenous peoples, helped put him and then his students into this cosmological perspective, because Confucianism, which he was devoted to as a tradition, has these ideas of cosmos, earth, and human as a continuity of being, a dynamic, organic flow of life from the universe right down to humans, the chi, the force of life through everything. This meant so much to Thomas. And he and Ted DeBerry went to China in 48, 49, because they were so driven by these traditions of Asia, trying to understand them. 70 some years ago. It's extraordinary, really. And that's when they brought these studies of these traditions back to Seton Hall, St. John's, and Fordham, and Columbia, where he worked with Ted DeBerry to set up the Oriental Thought and Religion Seminar, which was just astonishing. So we were the beneficiaries of this great drive that, again, began with a massive infusion of spiritual energy in the monastery, in his contemplative life, in the cycles of prayer, in the cycles of the day and the seasons and the universe. And then it just arose, exploded into the study of how these religions had similar cosmologies and ecologies to offer us today. And that's the root, too, of our studies of world religions and ecology. It all came from Thomas's brilliant understanding of these world's religions. Now I'm going to pause here because you can see I can go forever, and I do have quite a few notes that I haven't even gotten to with my enthusiasm for his life story. But I want to pause and say, many of you know, it wasn't just the world's religions, but he came in these later years of his life, and his most effective writing actually happened after 60. I met him when he was 60, and he wrote The New Story in his early 60s, 1978, imagine. And that idea of the new story is something that affected all the rest of his life. He lived to 94 and wrote many, many of these essays. So those of us who are older should take heart that there's work to be done post 60 for sure. But I want to just say, in a transition to Sam King, is that the new story is one of his central contributions to our moment, to our time, in Universe Story that he did with Brian Swim, and Journey of the Universe that we did with Brian. It all goes back to this notion, that essay of 78, that we need a new story. And we're so thrilled to be candid that Sam King, who is a student at the Divinity School at Yale and also taught at Hotchkiss, one of the great prep schools here in Connecticut. He's a scholar of the world's religions and has been our TA, but he's also our outreach program officer for Journey of the Universe, because he has such a feel for why this story is important, especially in our moment of change, of disruption, of despair, of anxiety. And I'm so thrilled that he can be here, because it's really the next generation that counts in this discussion. And we like to say it's an intergenerational handshake to all of our students. But Sam, thank you so much for taking time tonight to be with us. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary Evelyn. And thank you to Brian and the Gonzaga Center for having us tonight. It's such a gift to be able to share a few reflections with you all, especially following Mary Evelyn, who has had such a profound impact on my life, along with John, through carrying forward the vision of Thomas Berry. I first came across the work of Thomas Berry at a workshop that Mary Evelyn and John were leading in Litchfield, Connecticut, at a place called Wisdom House, which I thought was quite fitting. And As a young teacher of philosophy and religion, I was interested in how do you get young people to experience themselves as part of this larger tapestry to which we all belong, this larger whole, and to create a sense of meaning and purpose in the midst of the ecological crises we face and the cultural challenges of our time. And immediately I was enthralled. Although I never met Thomas Berry in the flesh, I could feel his deep, prescient vision for the Earth community through the words of Mary Evelyn and John, ever since I first saw The Journey of the Universe. And I was so fortunate after meeting them to be able to screen the Journey of the Universe film for my classes at Hotchkiss, and to see the vision of Thomas Berry through this film, through telling cosmology as an integral story for our times. I could see the way it animated my students' eyes, and it connected the dots in a way that often disparate or fragmented academic disciplines had not. And I knew that this was a path that I wanted to follow. And I've been so blessed to come to Yale and to be studying with Mary Evelyn and John, and to be working alongside them as they try to carry forward some of Thomas Berry's vision. In particular, with the Journey of the Universe project, I've been interested in helping to carry forward that vision of how do we teach the story of the universe to younger generations? How do we cultivate this sense of belonging for young people eager for a sense of meaning in this vast evolving universe? And also orient young people to the great work of our time, of moving toward an era of human earth flourishing. And I've been so excited that Mary Evelyn and John have helped me to help carry forward this vision for Journey of the Universe 10 years later, and sort of help bring the next iteration of the project. So I've been really fortunate. I saw Jennifer Morgan is on the call, and I've been really lucky to connect with some kindred spirits through the Deep Time Network, which she's the founder of, and to meet some other educators across the country and the world who are very eager about carrying forward Thomas Berry's vision for the universe story as a context for education. And as a former high school teacher myself, I've been very passionate about creating curriculum that teaches integral ecology and integral cosmology to the next generation in a way that doesn't only elicit analytical knowing or intellectual knowing, but a felt experience of communion with the broader cosmos. So I've been very fortunate to develop a teacher's manual for secondary school teachers, adapting the 11-part sequence of the Journey of the Universe project in a way that can help bring learning alive for young people. And through other connections through the Deep Time Network, I've been really fortunate to collaborate with some educators to build resources for secondary school teachers that they can draw upon to lean into this deep time perspective that Thomas Berry was evoking and bringing forward in his teaching and in his writing. With the Journey of the Universe project, I've also been fortunate to help with a number of film screenings and discussions at a variety of educational venues, and to be helping to write the monthly newsletter, and to be developing a podcast. So ways of carrying forward this conversation and this idea that the universe is telling its story through all of us. And through that sense of connection to a larger story, we can develop the ethical sense of obligation and responsibility to care for this earth, which we all know is so particularly important at this moment during COP26. The last thing I'll mention briefly is the work we're doing with the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology, bringing forward some of Thomas Berry's ideas of religions entering a planetary phase, religions entering a phase in which they are drawing upon their ecological resources to meet the great challenges of our time. And we are very fortunate to be launching 6 online courses through Coursera in the coming weeks that center on the ecological dimensions of the world's great religions. And the forum has also released an eco-justice hub recently on the forum website that highlights the ways in which religions are emphasizing eco-justice and bringing forward deep ethical visions to respond to the great challenges of toxic pollution and species extinction and climate change. So very much answering the call that Thomas Berry was demanding and invoking in much of his work and scholarship. So just wanted to thank you again, Brian and Mary Evelyn, for allowing me to be here. For friends like Dick Reisling, Lisa Shebley, Jennifer Morgan, thank you so much for being here, and I'll leave it back to you, Mary Evelyn. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sam. And I hope you're able to stick around for the Q&A in case there are any questions for you as well.
Thank you so much, Sam. You can see that we're blessed by this next gen that really is empowered by Thomas and Journey, and he's been working very closely with us on these new MOOCs that we're about to release, hopefully in early December, on the world's religions and ecology. And they'll be on Coursera, they'll be available for free, and so on all the world's religions, including indigenous traditions, of course. But I wanted then to pick up, and this is, again, the homage to Thomas. We've just gone through All Souls, All Saints Day, but the lineage of the ancestors is extraordinary, isn't it? And so he and Teilhard are the great inspirations in this work. And I want to just say, I see some other folks like Terry Dupuy and Kevin Cawley, our friend from Iona, who has an amazing Carbon Rangers newsletter that we just posted also in our forum newsletter. It was so marvelous because he highlights young people, and Sam and Paula, Sam's wonderful oratorio for the universe story. And I could go on, but Sister Margarita at Mary Knoll, and Michael Dowd and Connie Barlow, thank you all for joining us. It's just marvelous. And each one of you are doing the great work. That's why I'm giving these kind of shout outs. But let's come back to this new story. So it was in 77, 78 that Thomas kind of called together in his own wonderful way the few people to live with him at the Riverdale Center. And that center was founded from 1970 to 95. And so we had 25 years there with Thomas overlooking the Hudson River with that great, huge red oak that he dedicated the Dream of the Earth to, this magnificent 400-year-old tree. But during that year, John Grimm, my husband, the year before we were married, lived with him, along with Brian Brown, one of our great friends and colleague, retired now from Iona College, and Valerio Ortolani, a Jesuit. And John loves to say, they had lunch from 12 to 3, and Thomas would talk, and they'd gather again from 6 to 9 for dinner, and with music and so on. And I would join them often for one of those meals. And during that very generative year is when Thomas came up with this idea of a new story. And he was trying to say, well, all religions have the stories that inspire them, that found them, that give a grounding for the ethical path, for why we get up in the morning, for what animates us. And so he was trying to say, we need a story that's not just the particularity of the world's religions, although he led interreligious dialogue, 40 years ago. He said, we must learn from all of these traditions. And he said, after the Second Vatican Council, there's not just rays of light, there's floods of light in the different world's religions. But by studying those traditions, he realized the story, and especially the cosmological story, is what grounds us, orients us to the cosmos, nurtures us, and transforms us. And so he took that idea and put it into a very simple essay. And I still think we can draw from the 3 principles in that essay that he says govern actually the universe and become the source of values. And this is ethics in a much larger sense, because I think you know, we're not just into environmental ethics are exceedingly important, and the philosophy of ethics is very important, and we've got to move from utilitarian value to intrinsic value and to rights of nature. But we're missing slightly the larger context, because we always think the ethics are coming from the human, created by the human. But if we think through, once again, these three principles that he feels govern the universe, okay, govern the universe: differentiation, subjectivity, and communion, okay? Differentiation, subjectivity, and communion. That everything is different and unique, clearly in the human order. This is true. And that difference is a blossoming forth of immense creativity in the human order. And that is what's to be honored. And that's the source of human rights. It's a source of human dignity. It's a source of social justice teachings, and so on. The difference and the uniqueness, the special sense that every fingerprint is different, right? Every leaf is different. Every snowflake is different. Isn't that amazing? I'll never forget a friend in college who was blind, and I was kind of her older sister and would help her from different days, guiding her around the campus. And she would say, "Can you tell me what a snowflake looks like? I mean, who could describe it?" And then she would say to me, "Oh, you've just said the moon is up at the same time as the sun." You know, sometimes that happens. She lighted up in me this sense of the magic of the universe and the earth. So that sensibility is foundational to how this universe has unfolded, how the earth has created life, and how humans have generated amazing cultural difference. And of course, we can then begin to say, and yet, as the Prime Minister of Barbados said at the opening talks in Glasgow just 2 days ago, she said, "The pandemic has shown us that these problems can't be solved by different nation states. We need unity and coming together." So differentiation is a quality that we can value, but we don't rest there, and we don't make difference in any way something that is going to cause problems, to say the least. So Thomas also then went into, we need subjectivity. We need this sense. His most famous line, as we know, is the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. And that's why Brian's book, Beyond Mechanism, everything's an object. It's so important, right? But why is that line so important? And I want to just give its further reference why Teilhard is so important to many of us. It's because Teilhard said there is a within of things. There is this spirit matter evolving together over time for greater complexity and greater consciousness. So from the simple to the complex, from lesser consciousness to more reflexive consciousness. But everything has interiority, subjectivity, this self-organizing dynamics that biologists are explaining to us, and emergent properties. What does that mean? It means, as we know now, trees are sentient. Trees have roots that are connecting. The fungi, Suzanne Simard up at the University of British Columbia, who discovered this incredible communication of the roots of trees. The German forester who wrote The Hidden Life of Trees. David Haskell, The Song of Trees. He's listening to trees and so on. Robin Kimmerer, the traditional environmental knowledge based on the interiority of things. So this notion of interiority is exploding in our consciousness right now, which is thrilling. I would say Jane Goodall was one of the first scientists to say with the chimps that she studied, we are connected to them, 99% of our DNA and so on. But because these are persons, personhood, these are alive, sentient beings. They're not objects. And so the mammalian world became open to the study of animal consciousness. We know animals weep, elephants weep for their dead, right? We know the communication that Paul Winter has been doing in music between the dolphins communicating songs, the whales, etc. We could go on and on. I'm especially fascinated with migrations. How do birds migrate? How do fish find their way back up to the same streams where they spawned, and they spawn there, the next generation? This is extraordinary. You know, the red-knot sandpiper flying from Tierra del Fuego in southern Chile, in South America, flies to the Chesapeake Bay, eats the horseshoe crabs of that egg, their eggs, goes up to the James Bay area, has their fledglings, has their next generation. Those birds, fledglings, fly all the way back to the Chesapeake Bay and back to Tierra del Fuego on their own without the parents. Many Arctic birds do that. Now, this is an intelligence. Thomas Berry would say all the time, there are multiple intelligences in our world. This is subjectivity. This is what's beginning to explode in human consciousness. Native peoples all over the world understood this in varying ways. And I'm not just trying to idealize them, but the sense of differentiated consciousness and subjectivity is part of Teilhard, it's part of Thomas, it's part of the Confucian world with Qi, it's the Taoist world, and so on, why I'm so attracted to those traditions. So, interiority, so precious and so important. Why? Because we can't destroy things that have interiority. Why is Jane Goodall advocating over and over for the care of this great mammalian life and biodiversity? This is the heart of the transformation that we need right now for the environment, for climate change, for biodiversity loss. And the third great point of this essay, so seminal, so brilliant, every line of that essay, is communion. So how can there be connection to the bird world, the animal world, the fish world, to other human beings, unless there is this interiority? We call it soul in humans, spirit in humans, and so on. So we value, the value of humans is because of consciousness, the dignity of humans, and on and on. But everything has this interiority. Rocks do too. Native people understand that. Anyone who walks along a beach and picks up shells and rocks knows there's something going on there. The geologists have been some of the most receptive to Journey of the Universe because they can see the deep time and changes that we're trying to evoke through this unfolding universe story. So communion is what we are searching for in this most fragmented time, the most fragmented time, I think, in human history, where despair, disempowerment, eco-anxiety is arising on every side. If one is alive, one is struggling with where is the future of the planet. And that's why we made Journey, obviously. It's why we've edited his volumes and tried to carry on the Teilhardian vision. Because it is a vision of hope and possibility. It doesn't have all the answers, but it is something that puts us in a new context. And I want to maybe just draw this to a close, never a close, but to an open for some questions by saying, first of all, those of you who happen to come from a Christian tradition may be intrigued to know that Thomas Berry did not use religious language per se, because he wanted to appeal to people with or without religious feelings, sensibility, background, belonging. He wanted to appeal to the whole human community. But differentiation, subjectivity, and communion come from his understanding of the Trinity, of a generative force of differentiation, a God force, however you want to say it, a creator force. Subjectivity is the logos in all reality, the inner form of life, giving it pattern, giving it emergent properties, giving it the potential to change. But the logos, as St. John's Gospel says, is in the beginning. It has human form and a Christ figure, but the logos is in everything. And that was true for Thomas. And communion is the Spirit bringing things together, breathing life, hovering over the planet, as Hopkins says in his poems. So this Trinitarian idea has profound legacies back into a tradition and yet forward into the cosmological, ecological, biological world that we inhabit. And that's very exciting, isn't it? I think it has more potential than we've yet begun to explore. But I want to say that if we take, where does this go? If we take this idea of new story, the sense that we need a new context, we need a new worldview, we need the sense, again, that Brian and others are working on from a Whiteheadian perspective, from a Teilhardian perspective, and way beyond, that this organic, holistic, dynamic, changing, differentiated sentience is emerging in human consciousness as never before. Never before. Our parents and grandparents couldn't have really grasped this. And that's what Brian Swim, among many things he brings forward, is this sense, this is a moment of a change of consciousness that hasn't really been seen before in human history. And you take someone like Robin Kimmerer, why have 500,000 books been sold? Why is she such a magnificent phenomenon? We've invited her here to Yale to give the Terry lectures in religion and science, which are, 100-year-old lectures. Why is this so important? Because it's combining the science that we can definitely value, but the indigenous knowledge that we need to value too. That sense of the life force, the living earth community in everything. That's the new conjunction of this worldview that's coming into being. And it's thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling, excuse me, and empowering. Now, that sense, then, new worldview, living earth community, and we have a book of essays on the website. Just Google Living Earth Community. It's an open source book. David Abrams and Edward Cohn, who wrote the How Forests Think. So many people are writing on this now. So I invite you into that. But it's a dynamic vitalism too, and animism that is emerging. And I'd love to talk more in the question and answer. So this new worldview, this new story, then we go to action. But before we go to action, because I think a lot is emerging in action, no question. But between that is this question: what do we do with our suffering? What do we do with the anxiety that is eating us alive? Drew Dellinger, of course, has this notion of 3 o'clock in the morning. What do we do with our suffering? And I'm so conscious with Carl Anthony on this wonderful call. We have such a consciousness of people, minority peoples in this country, African Americans, Latinos, Latinx, Native Americans, of suffering beyond measure. And we are finally called to tell our story. And that's why this eco-justice movement that Sam referred to is so important. We've got to confront the suffering, not just of ourselves, but of the historic suffering that has been caused by all kinds of reasons that we can name, and we won't go into at the moment. But this question of suffering of people and the planet is something that is right before us. And I do not have the answer, but I'm putting that into our questions like Rilke said, living the questions. The only thing I can say for me is Joanna Macy has been trying to help people deal with despair and empowerment in the nuclear age and now in the ecological age, the climate change age, by going through that sense of despair, by recognizing the tremendous suffering that others have had over history and that so many are having right now due to climate change and all kinds of things around the world. It is unspeakable. So climate anxiety, eco-anxiety, it's right there. How do we deal with it? How do we compost it into the work that has to emerge? So that's a question that will be here for all of us, I think all of our days ahead. But I do want to come then through the worldview change, the tremendous subjectivity and living earth that's emerging, to the sense of the suffering that has been caused, to action. And Thomas said over and over again, we've got to change the major institutions: education, economics, religion, politics, and beyond. And I would say, even though not fast enough perhaps, but these institutions are changing. You know, if we take the economic system, we have ecological economics now. It's being taught in our school. It's being taught across the country, a new understanding. Nature's economy is primary. Human economy is secondary. And the exemplification of that is divestment. You know, $4 trillion of divestment now, started by Bill McKibben and many others, and that is not going to stop. Massive movements of divestment of oil and gas, on, and it's very concrete. I could talk much more about the ecological systems and their changes, but they are becoming manifest, and this is unstoppable. You could give so many examples of the finance community finally stepping up. Climate change is a disaster. My brother's head of Chubb Insurance in New York, they can't insure the coastal water properties. They are, the CEO of Chubb and other insurance companies are saying this is an existential crisis and we must make changes. So economics, education. Thomas would be just almost screeching, where are the environmental programs? Well, now there are environmental studies programs all over North America, but around the world and so on. And finally, they're integrating not only science and policy and economics and law and technology, but they're integrating this religion and spirituality, the ethical component. And that is a huge step. So the educational system is changing, I would say, and it's being pushed by this movement of eco-justice and the voices of young people, without question. If we come to an integral ecology, by the way, which was a term that Thomas first used and is very present in the Pope's encyclical, the integral ecology of people and planet is also very much part of environmental studies programs. Now, the institutions of religion, that's why we've been trying to activate them towards their emerging ecological phase. And it's exploding. There's thousands of religious leaders, as you know, over in Glasgow right now. Statements are just bubbling up. The Pope's encyclical, Laudato Si, is a game changer because it finally puts together the environmental and the social justice in ways that are such a watershed. Our School of the Environment at Yale didn't fully get what was environmental justice. It does now. Our Divinity School didn't fully get what was the environment. A total change of consciousness because of that encyclical, Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. So valuable. So religions are changing. Not all, not fast enough. There's still a problem there, but there's still promise. And finally, the political changes. It's very disheartening, I know. I'm not going to go into just our own country because there's people from around the world here. But even something like the Green New Deal, which has really caught on in Europe. And I take Europe to be leaders in so many of these environmental changes. They are light years ahead of us. But even something like a Green New Deal just would not have happened 5 or 6 years ago, for sure. So we have people pressing for the political changes that we need. We know they're going to take time. And in the discussion, I don't want to go into lots and lots of politics, because I want to come back. Let's take the step back and open it up for questions to say, with an emerging worldview change, beyond mechanism, beyond a sense that it's a collection of objects, with the full embodiment of a communion of subjects and subjectivity emerging, how can that carry us forward into the Ecozoic age that Thomas was speaking about? It's messy, it's not going to be easy, but we have, because of Teilhard, Thomas, Whitehead, and many of you out there, many emerging great works. I could talk about food and agriculture and urban ecology and industrial ecology at our school exploding. My final note that Kevin Cawley picked up so beautifully in his newsletter, Carbon Rangers, the Ecozoic Era, is hope in young people. The students at Yale are beyond amazing because they've not lost hope. They've not lost their creativity. They are exploding with the energy that you can see all around the world being represented in this COP meeting in Glasgow. And that is what we need to keep reaching out to, making an intergenerational handshake happen. And I think there's no question, this is the moment and we can do it. Thank you so much for listening. And I look forward to questions, comments, contestations. Thank you.
Dr. Tucker, thank you so much. This has just set our plates brimming full, and I'm confident we'll have a good exchange here. So thank you. We've got a couple ways for people to participate in. I think I'd like to start off with suggesting to direct people to the Q&A first. I'm also going to make it so that, so if you have a question, please pose it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your window. You click Q&A, it's separate from the chat. And you can pose a question there. I'm also going to make it so now that you can raise your hand. So if you wanted to, we should be able to make it so that you could pose your question directly. While you're collecting your thoughts, everyone, I'm going to take the liberty of posing an initial question for thought. As I was listening to your comments, I was reminded of another watershed essay in a similar time to the 1968 piece. In a year before, in 1967, Lynn White Jr. wrote this famous essay in the journal Science called Historical Roots of the Ecological Crisis. Lynn White Jr. So, and it continues to be anthologized, and as you probably know well, he claims that the historical root is a mistaken interpretation of Western Christianity's notion of dominion, which presents us in this dualistic, anthropocentric way, and that we will never have a true solution to the crisis by just more science and more technology, but that we need to have to use Barry's idea, right, a new story. And this started off the trajectory of what became environmental ethics in the following decade in the attempt to get a better worldview, a better story. So my question's twofold. One is, was there any sense that Barry was aware of White's essay? Is it just a wonderful coincidence that the zeitgeist had them sort of pushing in this similar formulation? And two, if you have a sense whether or not do you see him sufficiently answering this question? I guess I will put it vaguely to start off with, but take either part of that or both if you like.
Are you saying, do you see Thomas answering that question?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the Lynn White article in Science 1967 has been, one of those short articles that's had a long-lasting life and influence. And I think it's been very, very important. There's no question. It can be a little bit of a distraction. So we don't feature it in our new MOOCs. We put it in the deep dive, as we like to say. But usually I have students read it, and he's pointing. First of all, he points to the Benedictine tradition, the Franciscan tradition, as having ways forward. And he also points to a biodemocracy, which is something that Thomas understood well. So just to be brief, to make sure there's enough time for everybody's or some question, it's a hugely influential article. He does critique what I would say is the transcendent salvation instinct of some religions outside this world, so that we're not paying attention to the world, and also the desacralization of the world. And that's why I'm keep coming back to, and some of the biologists as well, is these are unbelievably complex processes. And that's an entryway back into, you can call it panentheism or whatever you want, or pantheism for that matter. But the Gaia hypothesis, which Richard Page is referring to in the questions, is absolutely on the same understanding. This is a living Earth system. There's absolutely no question, and we are responsible as full members. So thanks for that question, and thanks, Richard, also for the question.
Wonderful. Okay, so if you'd like, you can see the questions there, and you could do if you wanted to is to click answer live if you'd like to take one over the other, since we'll have quite a few, and then every now and then I'll pose one of them or one myself. So did you want to take one, any of those in particular?
Yeah, let me just jump quickly to a few, and I want to make sure Sam might pick one or two that are interesting to him.
Yeah, I had one for Sam in the chat that I'm going to pose to him directly. That I want to make sure we get to as well. So I have at least one or two for him as well.
Super. I'll just do maybe two quickly here, and then let's go over to Sam. One is a David Corton question, who wrote How Corporations Ruled the World. He dedicated one of his books to Thomas Berry. He's talked often about a new story as well, and this new economy, living Earth systems model. Definitely we support it, and definitely that's what Barry was saying also. There's a number of people who've been talking about the need for a new economy. So thanks for bringing David into the conversation. He's very much part of this.
And his magazine, Yes, I think is another source to go to for a popular version of Corton's work, I believe.
Totally. Yes magazine is marvelous. Very positive stories. We love it. And then the inspirational connections between Barry and Teilhard. This is what I was trying to say, but I was speaking so quickly, I think. So Teilhard is foundational to Thomas Berry, to Brian Swim, to myself and John Grimm, and to this work of universe story, journey of the universe. Absolutely critical that the sense that Teilhard had of a dynamic unfolding universe of greater complexity, greater consciousness, but especially of this within of things, the interiority of things. And I could say lots more, of course, about Teilhard, but all of that went directly into Thomas Berry's thinking. Thomas did have some critiques of Teilhard, like all of us, that he was too optimistic at times, that he had a bit of a technozoic vision rather than ecozoic, building the earth and a faith in technology, etc. So this was a wonderful critical appreciation. And one of the Teilhard studies is about Thomas Berry's differences with Teilhard that he gave at a talk at Columbia years and years ago. But
I'll resist the urge to get into Whiteheadian and Teilhardian metaphysics at the moment. Another time, though, that would be fun. I did have a question about a week ago on a similar note, though. They were wondering about Thomas Berry and Teilhard de Chardin's currency within the Catholic Church today. How would you describe the Church's attitude toward these thinkers at the moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, to be completely revelatory, like about the Laudato Si, which of course I think is magnificent. And by the way, Bill McKibben, says Laudato Si is the most important document of the 21st century. And a great writer in India says the same kind of thing, Amitav Ghosh. Now, Laudato Si is based on Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor. Leonardo Boff wrote a book in our series, Ecology and Justice, in 1997 with that title, because Thomas Berry said to Leonardo, the liberation theologian from Latin America, Brazil, he said, Leonardo, we can't liberate humans without the earth. This is where social justice wasn't connecting to the environment. And Leonardo got this. He is a huge proponent of Berry's ideas, in fact. So within progressive areas of the church, Thomas and Teilhard are appreciated. I think the Jesuits can do even more with Teilhard. But they're still, to be candid, I think they're still on the periphery in certain ways. But that's okay. We keep working forward. And so, Brian, I don't know if you'd like to go over to Sam, because I see lots of questions in the Q&A now.
Yeah, Sam. So I have two different questions. So one was posed in the chat a while ago, and I copied it down here. And I think it was directed at you. They said, how do we overcome, you were talking about, I think, curriculum and some of the work you were doing with schools and your background as a high school teacher. And they asked, how do we overcome the fear of critical race theory to do the work you're describing? And I do not hold that fear, but live in part of our land that does. So is the worry, I suppose, that if we start doing this, that it will have it'll trigger a negative response similar to what we see with worries over the boogeyman of critical race theory?
Yeah, that's a great question. While I can't speak to the particularities of the reception of critical race theory, what I can say is that the Journey of the Universe project celebrates the emergence and the importance of racial justice and its connection to ecological justice. As Mary Evelyn was saying, this inextricable relationship between ecological justice and social justice, the idea of the cry of the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor as complementary, and that the Journey of the Universe project features, among other things, a really powerful interview with the city planner and African-American activist Carl Anthony. And in that conversation series, he draws upon his African-American identity to talk about how the deep time perspective has helped him reclaim the sense of pride of his ancestral roots in the African continent as the wellspring of humanity. And it's a really beautiful way of connecting this deep time sensibility with this emerging idea of racial justice, and through his activism work, directly drawing upon deep time. So while those issues are very complicated, I can't speak to the particularities of critical race theory and its sort of instantiation within public schools, within different school systems. I can say that I think that a deep time perspective that is marrying a sense of justice with an embeddedness, integral narrative within the universe has great generativity and power for how we address these problems of systemic racism and racial justice.
Thank you, Sam. I would add that, because I think part of what the question is being motivated by is whether we can do this work without it becoming another unfortunate political football. And so it's an interesting challenge for all of us to wonder about how to do this work without cheating it, but don't allow it to become victim of the tribal political system that we've got. And so since one of the new fronts of this cultural struggle is at the school level, it will be incumbent on all of us to figure out how to do this work well, thoughtfully, carefully, in a way where we have inland areas like my own, where we have diverse communities politically. It's important to be able to figure out how to, center ethics, but not have it get sucked into the void. I'm trying to be delicate here. I hope that makes sense. You answered this question in the comments, Sam, but I wanted to also give you a chance briefly to comment on it. The question was about whether or not there's also been curriculum developed for younger students. Did you want to just briefly say a little bit more about, I think you referred to them to the Deep Time sort of project, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Jennifer Morgan has curated a wonderful array of resources for a variety of ages on the Deep Time Network website, which is dtnetwork.org. I put that in the chat. My work has been more specifically around adolescent resources. You can access those at journeyoftheuniverse.org/curriculum, where I've developed a teacher's manual to correlate with the 11-part paradigm of the journey story. One more thing I'll say in connection to your last question, Brian, is that the meanings are open-ended. I think that it's important that the curriculum is inviting the particularity of student experience to encounter these different parts of a cosmological story from students' own cultural, ethnic, religious, geographic location. So I have no illusions that a universe story would be taught in one way monolithically, but this is in the spirit of differentiation. It's exciting how a universe story is converging with other ways of knowing as it intersects with different cultural and educational environments.
That was beautifully put. Thanks for that clarification. Mary Evelyn, do you see a question that you'd like to take? If not, I'd be happy to pose one to you.
Well, there's so many good ones. One is, and I'll come to Linda Conroy's in a minute as well. One is about the financial community. I mentioned Chubb and so on. The insurance industry, if you look at Swiss Re or Munich Re's website, the reinsurance companies, they've gotten this for a long, long time. And I think our duty is to call them out, call them to the table and say, why aren't you saying to a larger public? And we're talking about European reinsurance companies, not just the US ones, but that they have recognized the financial disaster of climate change and so on. I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars now with all of these storms and hurricanes, and many insurance companies won't insure in California with the fires and so on. So we are at this tipping point where insurance companies, the financial industries are getting, there was just a report a few weeks ago that this is a financial disaster that we are creating. It already is. The Department of Defense has been saying for more than 20 years that climate change is a national security issue. Where are our media on reporting these kinds of things? The mainstream media is just not reporting what you can read on Common Dreams, Nation of Change, Truth Out, a lot of the other media. So this is part of our bubble. But the financial industry is onto this, I can tell you, because they know they're going to lose their shirts. The banks will lose their shirts. The insurance companies will as well. So there's lots more to be said on that. But Linda Conroy, up in the Pacific Northwest also, is saying, naming climate grief, pulsing all around us, felt healing. Now, I really appreciate that, Linda, because I think by naming it, we recognize that we're all suffering from this, this sense of grief. Now, she's saying also in my local faith communities, the priest has not read Laudato Si, and Kevin Cawley from Iona has made the same point. Our bishops have not, and Dan DeLeo and others did an incredible survey of the bishops and what they have not done. We know that, but we've got to say what is happening in other parts of the world. We can all be very frustrated by the situation here in the US, both with the church and with our political situation. But her point is, Linda's point is, are there suggestions for ways small groups can support each other and learn to honor the cost of climate grief? Absolutely. At our School of the Environment, there's now a 6-week mini course developed by the students on dealing with climate and climate grief, eco-anxiety. This comes into my box almost every day, how people are trying to deal with it. Our colleague Sam Mickey on our forum team is writing a book on this now. So these are the rituals. These are the processes that we are now creating for mourning to come to mourning. We have got to acknowledge mourning of what's being lost, of species, of ecosystems, of humans, of languages, and so on. It's a great transition. And again, we've got to come together to do this. I don't have the map. We're all creating a new map here.
There's a working group on the West Coast here, but it's in drawing in people from around the world. And I put the link to that in the chat, called the Existential Toolkit for Climate Justice Educators. And it started off as an informal group. They're working on a book now, but you can find on the website some of the emerging resources. And it's a mixture of social scientific resources and heavily emphasizing teaching. So a lot of really interesting research, but also pedagogies emerging in this space. And so I'm really, it's not my area of expertise, but I've been really interested just sort of to follow along. And it's certainly, I've often wondered if we're not doing educational malpractice if we don't bring this into our classrooms and help students to address the eco anxiety and grief that they're and we are all experiencing. So we just help them understand how bad it is, and not understand, have a way of helping them to address that grief and that anxiety. Then we're doing them a disservice. I see that Linda actually has her hand up. I'm sorry, Linda Conroy, if you have had it up for a little while. My apologies. I'm going to click allow to talk if you'd still like to join us. Feel free to do so. Are you there, Linda? Are you? I think you're muted still. She might have. Oh, can hear you a little bit. Yeah, you're coming in faintly.
I just want to say thank you. My question was beautifully answered.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Linda. Anybody else has a question, feel free to raise your hand and I'd be happy to unmute you. Richard Risling, feel free.
Hi, everybody. This is Dick Risling from the Catskill Mountains, and fresh off enormously wonderful meeting with Sam King at my organic energy independent farm. And I'd like to hear some more about this question or concern, if it is a concern, it's certainly real, the issue of suffering. I was surprised the way Mary brought that into the question, into the discussion tonight. I'd like to hear more about why that is such a concern. From your own perspective, grieving, I understand a little bit better than I do about the suffering. Is there a concern that this will stultify us? Mm-hmm. Or what is the reason that you brought that, I thought, not only surprisingly, but somewhat more prominent than I thought?
Well, that's a great question. And Sam will probably have something to say too. One of the reasons I love working with Sam and Next Generation is because they're confronting, as you know, may I call you Dick or Richard?
Absolutely, Dick, yeah.
Dick, thank you. And Sam came back with such glowing stories of his time at your farm, Apple Pond Farm, I think. Anyway, this generation has the greatest burden of any generation that is facing the unraveling of life on Earth. It's that stark. And that's what the first day at Glasgow COP meeting was over and over again. From the Secretary General of the UN to young people around the world who were zoomed in, to Prince Charles, to Richard Attenborough, the naturalist, to Boris Johnson and other state leaders. They were like, we are at the edge. They recognize it. And the changes are on the horizon. But if they don't happen and don't happen fast enough, we are risking everything. And by the way, one of the things that was at the opening session was a beautiful film of, it's kind of like a universe story thing, which said, here we are the only life that we know of in the universe. And it comes, down to the earth and the beauty of earth and so on. And it says, are we going to destroy all of this? But it says, we are in a universe that is meaningless. This is what the film says. And we are the only ones who understand meaning. That is part of the problem. This whole universe is infused with meaning that creates awe and wonder and beauty and therefore transformation. So my sense, Dick, is this, is if we get locked into our deep night anxieties of what's going to happen to our, we don't have children, but our students are our children, as you can see, our next gen. And we're so thrilled about that, but if our children, their children have no future, that is creating such suffering of people and planet that we've got to deal with it. Linda Conroy has been dealing with it for a long time. Many, many people are dealing with it. So it's one thing to lose a family member, a loved one, and so on. It's another to lose life. So my point is, people like Joanna Macy had been saying for years, despair and empowerment, her first book, one of her first, in the nuclear age. We grew up with nuclear weapons and so on. So she's saying we've got to go through our despair and come to empowerment. We've got to somehow deal with it, accept it, and move forward. But I want to turn now, because it's such an important topic. Sam, you've thought about this quite a bit, I think, and teaching young people at Hotchkiss and being part of the Yale Divinity School, and why Journey has meant something to you. Would you like to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess just one reflection I would have is on the life of Teilhard de Chardin, who was so influential on Thomas Berry. He was a stretcher bearer in World War I. He saw the horror of chemical weapons and destruction that war created. And he still found this zest for life, this reason for living, as being part of this cosmic story, this cosmogenesis, even in the face of great suffering and destruction. And that hopeful vision, I think, is what keeps us going forward. So that fear, that suffering, it's real. But I think we as Mary Evelyn is saying, as Joanna Macy illuminates, we need to move beyond that to what we can do. And that's what's I'm so excited about the work of Kathleen Degnan and Thomas Berry Forum and all these folks who are, and next week they have this event on ecological communities who are really trying to respond to this crisis and leverage the power of hope, which is, I think, always on the other side of despair.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for opening up this whole new universe of meaning for a 82-year-old geezer.
Can't wait to meet you, Dick.
Same here.
Thank you very much for jumping in. I want to, with our last question to Mary Evelyn, I'd like to go back to a theme in your comments. And that was about the, the urgency of the climate crisis and the urgent timelines that accompany it. I'm thinking of, in the philosophical realm, we've got a group of philosophers called environmental pragmatists who, to give a overly condensed version of their argument, they could say, I like your ideas about the great work and this need for a new story, but look, things are just too urgent. Well, timelines are too urgent. We don't have the luxury, even if we could change people's minds, and they're skeptical that we can change hearts and minds, that they would say, look, we just need to pass good policies. We need to give up this philosophical, theological projects and pass good laws and make people do what they need to do by internalizing externalities and all the rest. And that changing the story is a luxury we don't have. What if you could, I think you touched on it, but I wanted to encourage you to sort of, if you could, how would you answer that challenge?
Well, Sam, can I throw it to you first and then I'll pick it up? Be happy to. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's a both and. I think we have this political urgency and the need for concrete legislation, but we need vision. And where does that political wherewithal come from? I think it comes from vision and folks who realize the deep connection we have to an animate and communicative world. And so I certainly don't, believe in, purely abstract cosmology or navel gazing alone. We need to act. But I think this is something that the online courses we're launching really foregrounds. It's both an evaluation of the ecological teachings and dimensions of world religions, and also highlighting what's happening on the ground, what changes are actively taking place. And one more thought just about visiting Dick Reisling. He's somebody who, with his partner Sonia, they're living the great work. He told me about how they built this wind turbine that powers much of their farm in response to reading the great work decades ago. And I was just so deeply inspired by the community that they've cultivated. And it's both action and theory, mutually complementary, I would say.
Thanks, Sam. I couldn't agree more. And what Thomas would say, this is a functional cosmology. This is not just a beautiful cosmology or an inspiring story. It is a functional cosmology. And I think it's quite clear that it has already empowered thousands of people around the planet. And Jennifer Morgan's group now has a leadership program with over 100 people in the program from all over the world. Journey of the Universe has been translated into, 6 languages and so on. The film is translated into a number of languages. We showed it in China many, many times. And before COVID, we showed it at the Yale Beijing Center. 77,000 people watched it. And the Chinese really get this because cosmology is so much a part of their life and livelihood. So Thomas always said, it's a functional cosmology with, as Sam just said, the great work. The work flows out of it. It's not either or. But when you take a country that's gone like that into progress and modernity, like China, the longing for meaning and purpose is massive because they know materialism is meaningless ultimately. And that deep question for meaning is what will drive the action. There's no question. So to echo Sam, it's both and. The engaged projects of the religious communities are all out there, and many of you are doing the great work. We've got to encourage one another in that.
Well, thank you so much. I can't think of a better note on which to end than that. Let's all electronically, collectively thank Dr. Tucker and Sam for sharing their views tonight. It has been recorded for those of you who were asking again, and it will be available to you on our YouTube channel. Since you've signed up, you will be getting an email from me about how to find that. I also wanted to alert you to several events that are coming up soon. We have a presentation from our former health officer, Dr. Bob Lutz, and Master of Public Health, Amber Lenhart, on the health angle. And then, of course, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's mentioned several times by Mara Evelyn tonight, her amazing book. We will have her for an electronic talk on February 17th. It's free and open to the public, and I encourage everyone to register for that. Her groundbreaking work, Braiding Sweetgrass. And then on March 7th, we'll learn about from a local firefighter and city council member, Scott Hokinson. Last Labor Day in September of 2020, the town of Malden, just here east of us, southeast of us on the Palouse here in Washington State, 80% of it burned down because of a fast-moving wildfire made much worse by climate change. And so we'll learn about the challenges that we have in living with climate change here in the inland Northwest and in rural places around the world. So we hope to see you at another event very soon. Thank you all again for being with us tonight. And I hope to see you again at a Gonzaga Center for Climate, Society, and Environment in the future.
Thank you, Brian, so much. All the best to you. Thank you, Sam, as well. Wonderful.
Bye,
being with you.
everybody.